Good afternoon. Thanks for joining us. I'm Jonathan Massey. I'm Dean and Professor here at the Taubman College of Architecture and Urban Planning at the University of Michigan. And I'm really glad to be able to welcome you to a conversation between two representatives from two collective organizations that are leading at different scales and in different places. Conversations about racial equity and racial justice in the fields of architecture, urban planning, urban design, and in the ways that we study, shape, and prepare people to shape the built environment around us. Taubman College, as a predominantly white institution, has a lot to learn about how to more fully integrate diverse perspectives, and especially knowledge about and capacity for promoting racial justice through our research, our scholarship, our teaching and learning, and through professional practice in the fields of architecture and planning. We have a lot of expertise on our faculty and in our student and alumni groups, but we have not fully integrated some of the ways of knowing and ways of acting that we need to. And so this conversation is a way of highlighting people who are helping to identify and generate that knowledge and are ready today to explore it with us in a conversation. And so the two collectives that we're bringing together here, the first is Dark Matter University. Many of you are already familiar with this group, formed in the early summer out of a growing network of BIPOC practitioners and scholars across predominantly the United States. It is a group that was founded to work both inside and outside existing systems of practice and education to challenge, inform, and reshape our present world toward a better future. And the two representatives from Dark Matter University who are joining us today are Jelisa Blumberg and Lisa Henry. Jelisa is a practicing architect and a lighting designer based in Brooklyn. She's designed lighting for cultural projects in New York, such as a fashion exhibition at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, a leisure club and spa in Soho, a radio station in Chinatown, and an apartment gallery in the Lower East Side. And she's currently a project lead on residential projects at a design build studio in Brooklyn. Our other DMU colleague is Lisa Henry, who is chair and associate professor at the School of Architecture at University of Utah. Lisa's research is focused on how critical gender, race, queer, and disability theory intersect with architectural education, pedagogy, design, and production. And she led the transformation of the School of Architecture curriculum to focus on values of global citizenship, social equity, critical agency, resilience, and community engagement. After we hear from Lisa and Jelisa, we're going to also be hearing from 4 graduate students from Taubman College who are co-founders and protagonists in another collective, Design Justice Actions. This is a group also formed this summer, inspired in part by the Design as Protest Collective and by the larger conversation after the murder of George Floyd and in recognition of the real crisis in racial equity and racial justice in our cities and in our society. And Design Justice Actions has been an internal advocate within the college for many of the steps that we need to take to become a more inclusive and equitable organization. And representing DJA are, again, 4 of our graduate students, Emily Ebersol, Jamie Lee, Tori Smith, and Charlene Hobbs. They're going to conduct a dialogue with Lisa and Jelisa, and also will welcome audience Q&A participation afterward. So with that, welcome Lisa Henry and Jelisa Blumberg, and thanks for joining us today.
Hi, thank you. I'm going to get our presentation started now. Hi, I'm Jelisa Blumberg. Thank you for the warm welcome, Jonathan. You said it all. So I'm a lighting designer and architect here in Brooklyn. I came into Dark Matter University this summer via Designers Protest, a collective that has been, a part of this conversation well before the summer, that really was, asking for a lot of people to be involved. And that's how I came into this organization.
Hi, and thank you, Jonathan, again for that wonderful introduction. My name's Lisa, and I also joined DAP Collective this summer, and most of my work for that collective has been in the Dark Matter University, although I'm also working on some of their youth organizing and other activities. All right, so I wanted to start the presentation with DAP Collective. I think DAP Collective has been critical to the development of Dark Matter University. DAP Collective is basically a network of anti-racist designers dedicated to design justice. What we do in that collective is mobilize strategy to dismantle the privilege and power structures that use architecture as tools of oppression. So this is a network that's co-organized by BIPOC designers throughout the United States. And we champion a radical vision of racial, social, and cultural reparation through the process and outcome of design. The collective is focused on 9 demands, which include the abolition of the carceral state, the support of affordable, resilient communities and community knowledges, and the development of anti-racist design practice in training and licensing. And this is where Dark Matter University comes in, as well as some of our field organizing efforts that are focused on students and youth. The DMU has developed a life of its own. We have many members that have come directly to us. So this is basically 2 overlapping networks that are allied in their work on the burning questions of design justice, racial justice, and creating a better built environment for everyone to live in. Do you want to move? Yeah. So DMU is an anti-racist design school, collectively seeking radical transformation of education and practice towards a just future. And then that second sentence, actually, Jonathan explained that we are definitely working both within existing institutional boundaries, and we're crossing those boundaries and trying to expand those boundaries so that they provide access to many more BIPOC practitioners and academics to participate in this work.
And looking further at the vision in which we've, this vision was co-written by a set of us over a course of weeks. And this vision is kind of it's where we go back to this vision often when we think about what the work is about. And just to read the first sentence, we cannot survive and thrive without immediate change toward an anti-racist model of design, education, and practice. This vision is also, what's important about it being co-written is that we all collectively feel very tied to this vision, and it's definitely something that is, it's challenging us all to think about not just what we want, how we want to change, but the things that we need to change within ourselves, because we all have come from this, these existing systems that have allowed us to think certain ways, and I think a lot of that is very important to this work. Looking further at this network, we're a broad network. We all met online, which is amazing. Like, a lot of us haven't met in person, but the beauty of this is that we've been able to expand across the country and also outside of the country. We have already a lot of network roster courses that are being taught by people like Lisa and others in the network. And we're already developing a lot of courses that'll roll out next semester. And these courses are both in institutions, but we also have some examples of courses that will be shown, be taught within communities.
So the mission of Dark Matter University is to use our network, use our knowledge, and expand that network in order to form new forms of knowledge and knowledge production, new forms of institutions and power, new forms of collectivity and practice, new forms of community and culture, and of course, new forms of design. We're organized basically in order to support maximum membership and recognize people's different levels of commitment. We have core support and advisory positions, and we move fluidly through these positions. So it's a completely democratic community and people contribute to the best of their ability. Someone who's a core advisor today might become support if they become really busy in their work and their life, and they may return to core. Our work is also divided into 3 working groups. People, which is designed to support the network through mentoring and developing network and expanding network. Content is focused on developing coursework and broadcasting that coursework. And then opportunity is our group that's looking at grant writing, developing opportunities to disseminate this work for both people within the network and people outside of the network.
So looking at the network, what's important here is that we are a group of individuals that have such different entry points into this conversation. We're a diverse group of people, not just on identity, but also in practice. You know, we have people from such different fields, and the idea is to not just create, this space for BIPOC people, but it's also a space to be able to also engage with how interdisciplinary work is actually like the future, and that's how we can better how we can further these conversations is through interdisciplinary work. And so looking at the kind of work that we are doing, and this is predominantly in the content group, and the content group is really what people will be seeing. It's the outward facing content. It's the things that we all are engaging on. It's not just curriculum, like there's a few different groups within content. There's the curriculum group, which is really about developing courses and syllabi that we feel is dark matter, that adheres to the dark matter vision. Then there's broadcasting, which broadcast is, it could be something as simple as developing talks, but it's also looking to publishing as well. I think that it's something that has come up a lot is how you gain more access to publishing within institutions, but outside of institutions. Then there's also campus, which is this idea of how we create virtual and physical spaces for collaboration and for community.
And I just wanted to give one example of how Dark Matter University approaches this differently. If we think about publishing, we look at publishing. If you look at how publishing works in the field of architecture and in academia, it's often a gatekeeper place, right? In order to get tenure, in order to teach and create a career in academia, you have to publish. And our publishing institutions are very much controlled by people who've been in the field for a long time and who act as gatekeepers. So what we're developing is a kind of, rather than a peer-reviewed publishing model, we're developing a peer sponsorship publishing model. We have an example of this at the University of Utah with our publication of Dialectic. This is a peer-sponsored model in which we solicit ideas, and if the ideas are strong enough, we work with the writers to help them develop publishable material, to show them how to develop that material, how to put together the publication. We're also teaching writers and students the process of developing the magazine and publishing that magazine. The idea is to really open up those gates and allow more people through, focusing on BIPOC designers, focusing on people who are looking at decolonizing architectural education in its many facets. So this is an example of what we're doing that's different in broadcasting as opposed to what currently exists in the field.
And I think to add to that too, it's also looking at how we develop references and resources and a type of network of a library that doesn't feel like we're siloing subjects. And it's like, how do you expand references and research as well? And then just kind of zeroing in onto the courses, Lisa and I wanted to just highlight some of the courses that are coming out, because a lot of the work in the last slide, I think, is still in development. And it's, we're trying to work at a pace that is good for everybody. As a collective, we all are doing this work outside of other things. And so the courses actually have been such an exciting development, because we had a course call earlier like a few months ago, and it's interesting to look at the courses because it's not all, yes, this is anti-racist coursework, but it also shows examples of what it looks like when you ask a set of BIPOC people to offer out what they want to see in the field and what kind of subjects we're interested in, because that is that also is a part of this work. And we're just going to highlight some of the courses that we're working on and what's happening. So one of the courses that DMU has worked on is the DMU module course, and this is a type of course that is hosted by an institution and hopefully also in communities. And a module course also would be either co-taught or taught in modules. And so there's an example of this going on now. At Tuskegee, we have 5 architecture, design, and planning faculty that are within the Dark Matter University Collective, and they're all teaching this course that's about professional practice, and they're sharing their diverse career paths in architecture and construction, and that's going on right now. And then we were approached by Carleton University in Ottawa, and they already have a module. They already have a module studio in their winter semester, but they asked for us to offer out two module studios. And one of them that I'm working on with someone in the network, Curry Hackett, it's titled For With, an individual practice towards collective expression. And this course would be kind of focusing and examining and how we can examine and employ Black American modes of cultural production, and looking at these modes as not ways to learn more about Black culture specifically, but also look at the modes and how you can employ those in the design process. We're still in the process of developing this course, but it's going to be very exciting. We're excited to see what we can yield from that course. And then following that course, Killian Riano and Jen Lowe from the Dark Matter universe are also teaching a studio that's going to follow that is focused on community wealth building. Both of these studios are going to be sited in Cleveland, where Killian is based currently, and it's good because we're partnering with these organizations and people in Cleveland, and I think it'll be a nice set of studios that are going to hopefully we'll have some cool work that comes out of there. I think we will. The next type of course that we are working on in Dark Matter is a cross-listed inter-institutional courses. These are courses that are taught at 2 or more institutions. Currently this semester, there are some seminars that are being taught at Yale and Morgan State, and also at Columbia and Tuskegee. Next semester, there's going to be another course that's cross-listed, taught by Jerome Hafford and Curry Hackett from Dark Matter. And this is going to be focused on fugitive practice, which again, similar to the studio that I was speaking about before, this is going to look at Black, Indigenous, and other historically marginalized communities and their modes of cultural production. This would be a seminar that's taught at Yale and Howard University.
So the DMU Design Justice 101 is also a module course. This is a course that will be taught at 6 institutions in the spring. Each institution will be paired with a sister institution, and they will be able to choose from modules that we are currently developing. Modules that are developing include Black and non-Western modalities of cultural production, representation, localized mapping, alternatives to prisons, decolonize your site. So there's a really broad range of modules that are being developed, and then each team of institutions can choose from those modules to sort of tailor the design justice education to the work that's most pertinent to their students. And so we will have students from University of Utah and from Florida A&M in the same classroom working together and that will increase the diversity, the sort of academic and intellectual diversity that our students are exposed to, and give them opportunities to really work with each other and develop new ways of thinking about architecture. The final type of course is the DMU roster affiliated course. This is taught by faculty within DMU at their home institutions generally. And these courses meet the requirement of the DMU mission. So these are DMU affiliated faculty who are using their own work and using their own opportunities to push forward the mission and vision of Dark Matter University. We have a list of these courses here. These are courses that are being taught this fall, and I'm just going to talk a little bit about gender, race, and queer methods in architectural design, which is the course I'm offering currently at the University of Utah. This course typifies the kind of transformation that we created with our new curriculum. What's happening here is that we have a gender, race, queer, and disability methods course in architectural design, which is a seminar, and that is integrated with a studio. The seminar probes architectural practice through gender, race, and queer theory to explore how architecture can serve as an instrument of discrimination and the naturalization of normative values. We use the critiques of disability studies and indigeneity, which are particularly potent in showing the complexity of the built environment and creating disadvantaged communities. And there's a whole range of research methods taught in this course, including the critical analysis of representation, lobbying, and political engagement. So we're actually giving our students tools to engage in political process. This image that you see here is actually a part of a lobbying package that students put together to support a law that was eliminating a morality clause from licensure in many fields, including the field of architecture, that were basically preventing people who had been convicted of a crime from working in these fields. And the students put together a research packet, they put together an argument that was supported by materials, and then they put together these fact sheets that senators actually take onto the floor and use to support them in their debates. We have also do decolonizing culture and geography. So this map emerges from that project, from that research method. The students work collectively to study the history of a site, to study its implication in colonial processes, to study its implication in terms of equity, race, gender. In this case, we're looking at, in Utah, a community that's largely composed of immigrants and refugees from throughout the world. This project begins in the seminar with a study of methods, understanding the implications and limitations of that method. That project then begins to be, the students develop collective research and collective knowledge about a place that they think they're familiar with, but that in fact they learn quite a bit about. And then that project moves from the seminar into the studio to become, to sort of take the place of what would be a standard site analysis project and become the basis for design moving forward. This is another example of one of those maps. So what's happening is that the students are given the tools to create new forms of knowledge that go beyond what you would see in a normal architectural practice. And then they're also given tools of representation, drawing methods. This drawing method was derived from Chris Cornelius's work. We had him come to the university and talk to our faculty about how he works, how he brings indigenous value systems into his architecture. And then we, with his permission, of course, use that method in our studio to help our students bring social, cultural, race issues of justice into the design process, so that becomes the foundation for their design moving forward. After this, they do the same thing with program analysis, and then we're doing a post-colonial literary criticism to look at how post-colonial literature and the literatures of the communities that they are serving can teach us the spatial imaginaries of other cultures, the values of other cultures, and how those things might begin to be a part of our design of space.
Yeah, so that is a snapshot on the kind of courses that are part of this Dark Matter University network and collective. And we have a few other things coming up that are not as developed, but we have, for example, a partnership with the Van Allen Institute that will be geared more towards it's geared towards a community in Brooklyn and Gowanus. And some of those projects are not as developed, but they're very exciting and happening very quickly. And we keep having opportunities pop up, and it's amazing because different people in our network come together to work together on these opportunities. And so we just are wanting to finish with a few asks, and it's really what you're already doing is inviting us here, but to ask your alma maters to connect with DMU. We also are looking for partnerships for grant funding, because that's very important. And anybody can reach out to sign up to our network roster, and just we're just ask that people stay in contact with us.
And we do have students and youth on our network roster as well. We're looking at not creating a hard line between faculty, practitioners, and students. And just last night, we had a meeting with youth educators from high schools and community organizations. It was a teach-in that was basically designed to teach that group of interested people how to teach their students about the role that space and space making plays in social justice.
And just some contact. Thank you. Next we can stop sharing.
Yeah.
Wow. Thank you, Lisa and Jelisa, for sharing that work and the objectives of Dark Matter University, and for starting us off. It's a pleasure to be here with both of you, and it's just really inspiring to have this conversation with an institution like Dark Matter University that is concentrating on expanding and diversifying the architecture education and profession at so many scales. So yes, thank you. That was really exciting to hear. And to that end, we're also equally excited just to be here and to be doing this work within our own capacities as students. So I guess on that note, we have a few questions we prepared for you two that kind of touches on the impact of this initiative and then just possible alternatives to the current practices and educational content. So I guess let's start off with academia, which would be my question. And so I'm wondering basically, what does anti-racism in architectural academia look like to the both of you? And what are its core values?
Yeah, this is exactly the question that DMU is working on, and we're in a process of discovery. So I think one of the really critical things is that there's not necessarily one definitive way of looking at it. Each person in the network brings a different perspective. I will say I do think that there are some critical aspects of design justice education. One is the disruption of the sort of studio as a standalone primary part of the architectural education. Studio allows us to imagine that architecture is somehow an aesthetic project and not a project that is about the creation of social structures, right? And so it is precisely studio and the object fetish that allows architecture to make the excuse that racism has nothing to do with us, or equity has nothing to do with what we do. So one of the things that we're trying to do both at DMU and at the University of Utah is disrupt that isolation and make the studio responsive and responsible to other classes, right? We all understand that history and theory are kind of low-hanging fruit for decolonizing architectural education. But if we can decolonize the studio, if we can decolonize professional practice and technology, that's where we're really going to make some big differences. Technology is another one of those places where people say this is science. It's not necessarily, it doesn't have much to do with equity issues, but technology is an equity issue. When we choose a particular technology in a community, we impact that community's ability to control its own space. We impact that community's ability to make changes to the architecture that we create to serve their own purposes, right? We also impact community patterns of collective building that create community identity and cohesion, right? So unless we can bring community knowledge into a technology class as a way to question the way we teach that, we are missing a huge piece of what could potentially lead to a more equitable social structure and spatial structure. The same with professional practice. We have to redefine professionalism, because professionalism, if you look at all of our ethical codes, they're all about how we serve the client, that is the person who's holding the money, and not how we serve community and what our broader responsibilities are. So we're trying to decolonize all of those classes across the curriculum and make them responsible to each other. And that breaking down the silos within the architectural education, I think, is really critical. And then breaking down the silo of architecture from everything else. We have to use gender, race, and queer theory. We have to think about indigenous theories and ways of knowing. We have to think about how an architect should not consider themselves an expert, but an apprentice to every client and every community that they're working in, who can teach them new ways of knowing, new ways of thinking about space, and how to design for that setting in a way that is about cultural resilience and is about equity.
Yeah, you said it best, Lisa, but I'll add a few things to this too, is that I think that the other thing is to also look at academia in general and what kind of power structures that it implies. And I think that a lot of us that go into the university space, like not everybody who goes into the university, goes through university, comes from families that have been educated formally in this way. Not everybody goes into the university with like the same class backgrounds. And how do you, like make sure that these spaces are safe for everybody so that it doesn't feel like it's either or that you have more knowledge. You just have a different type of knowledge. And so something that we do talk a lot about is like, well, how do you also honor, respect, and the kind of knowledge that you have from your families, from your ancestry. Like that's also a type of education, and survival is a type of education. So those things, like how do you add value to that type of education so that in the academic space, when you have people who are either marginalized or alienated in those spaces, that they also bring value from their experiences. Architecture is not charity. So that's something that I think is really important too, that it's not a charitable act to think about anti-racism in practice. It should be a must. It should be absolutely always a requirement that you're always thinking about these things. So that's my additional point.
Very good. We actually know in academia, there are studies that show that one of the primary blocks to marginalized students succeeding is a focus on individual excellence and the sort of hero model, right? Like that people who come from marginalized communities are very adept at being responsible to each other, at supporting each other, and acting in community and acting in collaboration. So when academia focuses on individual work and individual excellence and individual genius, we are actually putting those people at a disadvantage. And it's a myth. There's no such thing as individual genius. You cannot be one person and create a building, right? It requires the work of many people to do that. So the way we teach architecture has so little to do, or the traditional ways of teaching architecture has so little to do with how architecture actually works. And we know from academic research that it marginalizes precisely the people that we want to have in this field. So changing those things, making us responsible to ourselves, and understanding that collaborative work is not only what you're going to see when you move out into the field, but it will support people who have traditionally been marginalized in our field, who are very alienated by that sense that the architect could be a singular hero. So there's lots of work out there if we open our doors to interdisciplinarity that can show us the way to go. We just have to be willing to do that and stop thinking of ourselves in such an isolated, insular way, which is marginalizing to the field as well as to academia.
Wow, you unpacked so much. Question. I want to keep on. I want to keep going. I have some follow-up questions, but we don't have time for them. So I'm just going to have to move it along to our next topic, which is design justice within the profession, which will be led by Jamie.
You're muted, Jamie.
Oh, thank you. Appreciate it. Thank you so much. So I think the academia and the profession always has been an ongoing conversation of transitioning, of thinking about how we can apply some of the things that we learned into the real world and what we should do. And so in response to that, I think the question would be more of, how do we restructure some of these values of our profession to center around design justice, and how do we expand this circle so that more people could be part of this conversation, and what are the opportunities of engagement?
I think going off of something that I was thinking about in the last question is that if you aren't, if we start to like think of ourselves not as heroes, as architects, and we are just facilitating from a set of skills, we are just another type of facilitator. If you look at the built environment, as Lisa was saying, it's not just a person. It's not even just an office. It's like you have not just consultants, you have people who are building this environment with their hands. You have laborers who are often rendered invisible when you think about when we comment on the built environment. You have so much erasure on what it actually takes and who is a part of that process and who it's for. Because I think there is this kind of hand of God mentality that happens, and it's like that's why you have the starchitect, and you go through school imagining that that's what your goal is. And I think even after school, it's like I've had to myself unlearn that sentiment, because I think at the end of the day, if you think of yourself as a facilitator, it's never about your vision. It's about collective vision and creating collective voice together, and that every hand on a project counts. Every hand has value. And I think that's what's important, is to devalue the role of the architect, to be on par with all the other voices. Devalue as in like, it's not, as I said, it's not hand of God. We need to get that type of teaching out. That's so outdated. It's not going to help anybody to think that way.
Yeah, and I would say also, I do think that the profession tends to define itself very narrowly, right? We think about the sort of architect with a capital A as the person who's designing the building, right? Even within an office, you often sort of see that kind of pattern. And I think what we need to do is begin to redefine the profession and redefine the structure of practice. So if practices include social scientists, if they include community facilitators, if they include people who come to architecture from totally different backgrounds and with totally different skills, that we can change the way we think about practice and what it means to go into a community and design with, for, and in collaboration with the people of that community. So I think that that's one thing. And I think that there are some places that are doing that. I think thinking about architecture beyond traditional practice. So when we teach professional practice in the school, we're very focused on SPCs and NCARB, right? So we have to take these changes all the way up that chain. We have to be able to teach how can students start CDCs in collaboration with community? How can people, when they emerge from architecture, look at really alternative ways of thinking about practice, right? Do we teach them how to write grants? Do we teach them how to develop CDCs? Do we teach them what the structure of a social equity focused firm would look like? If we're not showing them those things, what's happening is they're going out into corporate practice, they're getting jobs. Of course, they have to get jobs and support their families. They're getting jobs in corporate practice, and they're losing some of the knowledge that they have had in architecture as they're re-educated into corporate practice. So I think those things are really critical as we, again, decolonize professional practice classes, as we make decisions about who are the professionals we're bringing into the school to talk to students, who are the models that we want to have for our students. And I think the other thing that's really critical is to educate people about the role of space and how oppression can happen in space beyond architecture. Because if we empower communities, then suddenly the practices of community comment and things like that can be more meaningful, right? So I think this is the responsibility of architects and academics alike. Academics need to write papers that are accessible to every man on the street, right? We need to get into youth organizing and community organizing so that we're teaching communities the impact that architecture can have in their lives, so that when they do participate in community engagement in relationship to architectural design, they have a voice, right? It's not enough to bring them into the room. It's not enough to give them a seat at the table. We have to give them a voice at that table that is meaningful and and we have to hear that voice. We have to be capable of hearing that voice as architects. I think that's really critical. And hopefully, ultimately, if we can shift the profession towards community leadership and the respective community knowledges, we can actually start to absolutely change the configuration of that table, or as we like to say, flip the table, or however you want to say that. But I do think, yeah, go ahead.
Sorry.
No, go ahead.
There's also the giving, like offering tools, like helping, not helping, but facilitating tools, like new tools, and how you disseminate those tools, and new kind of modes of sharing knowledge. It doesn't have to be so, it's like so inaccessible now. You have to have a degree, there are all these things, and it's like, even the way that you speak, the fact that, we all know about code switching, the fact that people want to feel the need to speak a certain way, sometimes you don't need to. You can speak to people about the same things we talk about in the classrooms or in our offices and in academic spaces. This doesn't have to be a conversation that you need a degree for. We should be able to have these conversations anywhere. And I think that's the other thing, is just having how you share tools with others, and like how we all help each other build, a new language not build a new language, sorry, but build a new set of tools, I should say, a new toolkit.
Right, absolutely. And we see this starting to happen I've seen it starting to happen specifically in programs that are focused on gender, race, queer theories, that they're starting to actually teach academics, because academics have been taught a certain way, right? They're starting to teach academics to write for a more general public, and starting to value that a little bit more. This is about transforming the institution, but also creating an educated electorate, an educated public who can really engage in these issues.
Thank you, Lisa and Jelisa. That was a really good point. And thinking about alternative practices and reconfigurations, I believe there's a lot that we can offer as designers within this pandemic. So I'm going to pass on the time to Tori to host this part of the session.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jamie. And thank you, Jelisa and Lisa. Everything that you're saying really resonates, and it's really exciting for us to get to speak with you and see how passionate you are about the work and the care and maintenance of both BIPOC students within academia, but also the people within the larger profession and community members. So thank you so much. We're very appreciative for you taking the time and speaking with us. So yeah, getting into the question related to COVID, obviously currently we're in an unprecedented time. And I guess we were interested in how we as the profession can establish better standards of care and mental health. This is something that needs to kind of be worked on and furthered within architecture and planning in general. So how can we create spaces of care and safety in our profession, specifically during the global health?
Okay, let me just make sure I'm understanding the question. You're asking about how to change spaces within the profession, or you're asking how the profession changes spaces within community? I don't know.
I think it could be both. We could start with maybe in the community. I feel like that would be really helpful.
Okay. I think that one of the things that is happening with COVID is that COVID is making visible the dramatic inequalities that are experienced throughout the United States, right? It's making visible the consequences of a white supremacist society that's focused on maintaining segregation in this country, well beyond legal limitations on that, right? So we know that this country is incredibly segregated, and we know that we have a situation that is incredibly uneven in terms of levels of development in communities throughout the United States. And you can see that in the heightened effects that minority communities, BIPOC communities are having in relationship to this pandemic. I do think that in some ways, the professional response to that should be looking at what are going into underserved communities with the goal of learning about the structure of that community, learning about what's currently available in that community, learning about where that community is in terms of how the community can work to create resilience within itself, right? So we have to understand the skills that are present. We have to understand the knowledges that are present. We have to work with and through those knowledges in order to support communities and supporting themselves. I do think that the DAP focus on abolition and defunding and reallocating funding that's going currently to an incredibly large carceral state and an incredibly overfunded police state, and thinking about how we can deal with issues that those institutions are purportedly designed to deal with in different ways, and provide communities with the infrastructure that they need to be more resilient in these times, right? That infrastructure includes education and job opportunities. That infrastructure includes services in that community, whether it's smaller scale clinics or even hospitals and hospital space, whether it's community services that people can go to support food scarcity and things like that. I mean, there's so many ways in which segregation has created an atmosphere of scarcity. And we have to understand as architects what it means to design for and in a place of scarcity. And that's a really different thing than corporate practice is in some ways, right? So I think that that's really critical. And I think what the pandemic has done is, I mean, there are some very specific things that we can do that talk about the capacity of a space to allow for social distancing, the capacity of a space to allow for the sort of turnover of air. There's some technical aspects, but I think the bigger question is, how do we go into these communities and create communities that have equity? How do we disrupt the patterns of segregation? How do we disrupt the notion that these lives don't matter as much as white lives, right? I mean, I think that we have to go to the core of those things in order to really change the fabric of these communities to make them more resilient. And I think it has to happen from both sides, right? It has to happen from the community itself, because you cannot go into a community and say, we're gonna gift you with this wonderful thing and it's gonna save your lives, right? You cannot go into a community with that attitude. We have to learn from these communities and figure out how to support them. And then we also have to really understand that this pandemic has simply made visible inequities that have existed for years. And we have to be really real with ourselves about how we support and champion policies that are contributing to those conditions.
The only thing I'll add to that is I think it's also important that we're all learning, if we don't already know, the difference between mutual aid and charity. And that's like really the crux of it. Is I've been reading so much about mutual aid, and it is so helpful to understand the differences between mutual aid and charity, because that's all of what Lisa said is it's all about that. I guess we're going into the other questions, Emily.
Yeah, that works. Thank you so much to Lisa and Lisa and Tori, Jamie, and Shirley. And I think this is a good chance to open up the conversation to the larger audience. So we encourage viewers to type your questions into the YouTube chat box. So yeah, thank you everyone who's already been dropping questions. We'll start with a question from Serena Brewer, who is one of our DJA co-creators. And she asked a question as it relates to schools across the country who are spearheading letter writing campaigns similar to the Design Justice Actions at Taubman College. And she wants to know, how does Dark Matter University imagine making the connections between student organized initiatives like DJA, and is there opportunity to bridge these initiatives?
I think that this is exactly the space in which this is happening, like this type of talk. I think that having more people from Dark Matter come into the institutions is definitely the start. So it's asking, I think that as a student initiative, you can ask to have some representative from Dark Matter on your reviews even. You can't change what a student body or faculty looks like, but you can have people in your space either lecturing or sitting on reviews, because sometimes having the right person on your review can really shift the way that you view your own project, for example, or what you've done in a semester. And I think those are the very simple ways that those kind of conversations can start. And then on top of that, a lot of people that are in Dark Matter are also in Design as Protest, as I said, and Design as Protest is a large initiative that does have a student-oriented group, and it's led by students. And I think if you tap into that network, it can be really helpful to be speaking to one another, and with the support of this larger network. So those are the three things that I would say.
Yeah, and I would say also that the interinstitutional coursework that we're doing, trying to make connections between students from different institutions that have similar interests, is really critical. And I think that students are really powerful, right? Students are incredibly powerful, and we are listening to students right now in institutions, in part because our institutions know at this moment how, even as Jonathan said, how overwhelmingly white they are and have been, and how we cannot make those changes without students. So it's really critical that students make their voices heard, moving from up through their internally within their institutions. But I think architecture students could model a kind of collaborative network the way that DMU has. I love the idea of coming into DAP and using that network. But I think students can also strengthen and create connections across institutions in similar ways and really make your voices heard. And I think they are being heard. I mean, I think if you look at the initiatives that institutions have put forward in relationship to George Floyd and the recent protests that have happened that have opened many eyes. If you look at the initiatives, those initiatives are coming out of conversations with students. They're coming out of demands from students. Student voices are very powerful. They always have been. But I think it's a matter of sort of taking up that power and taking up that power interinstitutionally so that you have many different perspectives coming to the table with all the passion that students bring, right? I mean, my life is so filled with the passion of my students that's why I'm in this business. And I think the more you guys reach, the more you guys demand, the more we are enabled to achieve those demands, right? It takes some movement from students. Sometimes it actually helps the initiatives that we're doing. As a chair of the School of Architecture, I'm in a very privileged position, but I'm also in a somewhat limited position. But if I can go to my dean, if I can go to my president and say, look, this is what my students are demanding, and we have to find a way to make that happen, that amplifies my voice at the same moment that I'm amplifying student voices. So I think that you guys are doing a great job, but I do think just, continuing to reach forward, continuing to make demands and hold your faculty and your administrators accountable.
Yeah, those are both great answers. And it's so inspiring to see the work of other student-led initiatives as they relate to the larger networks, and how, we all, although we're kind of working within our own schools or institutions, we're all working towards one common goal, which is really, really powerful. So with that, we have another question from Jessica Lita, and she asks, to what extent do you see broader institutions implicated? Gatekeeping and exclusion are by no means limited to architecture programs. How do you see your work getting to the root of these issues?
That's a great question. I think that institutions, unfortunately, even the founding institutions of this country with such beautiful aspirations are falling short of realizing those aspirations when it comes to really understanding the level of inclusion that this country needs to sort of understand and the level of value that we need to ascribe to every life in this country. I think that I think that this is a moment when some of those gates are being cracked open. People are recognizing that the extent of segregation and separation that has existed in this country to this point creates a situation where people are sort of develop a kind of habitus and sensibility around what they see in their everyday lives. And the more that this happens from a very early age, right? From elementary school, right? It's almost too late to integrate at middle school, because in elementary school, we've already developing a kind of sensibility and a kind of way of being in the world that tells us what is valuable. And what we're being told is the thing that's most familiar, the thing that's closest to us. So I think disrupting institutions that have to do with housing practices, lending practices, creating the possibility for desegregating this country, I think is so critical, because I think that we learn so much at those early ages where we are mostly in segregated communities, right? institutions, I mean, I think the question is so broad because we can think about institutions across so many scales. I do think that we are working through DAP, through the University of Utah, to disrupt the gatekeepers to academia and make sure we have more diverse voices in academia, make sure that academia itself is in some way a humble voice that comes to the table to learn from community, right? But I think that there are institutions, whether we talk about health, whether we talk about law enforcement, whether we talk about housing, whether we talk about legal institutions throughout this country need to be questioned both from within and without in order to begin to transform and take responsibility. I do think that responsibility piece is very difficult. People often shirk the responsibility they have. We make decisions that are self-serving. We justify decisions that support racist policies by imagining that if we're just talking about individuals, we're not talking about race. And so making race visible, making it visible wherever it is, and then speaking out against it and trying to transform it is so critical at the smallest level, from me to my neighbor, all the way up to the sort of federal government level. And I know that's a really broad answer, but it was a really broad question also.
Yeah, I was going to add that I think part of it, when you think about gatekeeping, it's like it's this thing that we all have different types of access. We all have different types of privileges. And even if I think for myself, I think sometimes I felt so marginalized in the academic institution, but now I have that I have access to that now. And it's like, who am I inviting in then? And it's like, we all need to remember that we need to do this work collectively. We're not alone. None of us carry the burden alone. And to make change, we have to see where we can work collectively and where we can invite people in. And I think part of that is if you are especially somebody who benefits from the status quo, who are you inviting into your spaces? And that is the most important thing is we need to provide more invitation and less gatekeeping and we need to open up access.
Yeah, that's amazing. You're so right, Jelisa. It's about, recognizing our own strengths and privileges, and then how can we expand the circle from there. Okay, so I think we have time for one more question as we begin to close with 3 minutes left. The question is asked by our Design Justice Actions group at large, and we're wondering, what is your advice on continuing this work and staying inspired? It would be great to hear your advice for people in the discipline who are putting in the work or are eager to begin these conversations within their own institutions and workplaces.
I think one of the best ways to stay inspired is just find ways to just constantly be reading. And it doesn't have to be related to design or the profession, but, read poetry and watch film and listen to music that is outside of your comfort zone. And I just think that we just need to all be connecting with one another and find the joys in connection, because if we focus on that, then it bleeds into all the work we do. It's like work is not everything. The way that you live your life also should reflect, but if that's not reflecting the same things we're talking about here, then it's like, how do you invite that into your whole life? I think that is the one thing I would say about staying inspired is just keep inviting people in and staying connected.
I think what a great answer. I do love the sort of curiosity of mind that is represented in that answer and represented in the work that we do. The only thing I would add to that is that I think self-care is really critical. There are so many movements right now that are talking about the incredible work that is placed on the shoulders of people who are in these minority positions, people who have these experiences in their lives. And it is work that is joyfully done, but it also can be very heavy work. And so self-care as a form of protest, self-care as a form of continuing the process of inspiring yourself is so important, and making sure that you have the capacity. Because I do think, there are just times when you're carrying a load and you're carrying stress, and it diminishes your capacity when you step into a space that is an opportunity space, right? So make sure that you're taking time out to care for yourself, and whatever that looks like for you, whether it's exercise, whether it's rest, napping as a form of resistance, I'm all for it, right? I think these things are really critical, and we talk about this in the DP network. Every person in that network is doing this work every day. And every day there are triumphs and there is beauty and there is an incredible urge to move forward. But also every day there is disappointment and there is heartbreak that happens at the same time. And being able to take the time to step back and care for yourself and then go back to that space and do the work that needs to be done, I think is so critical to keep your energy and keep your inspiration up.
Wow, those answers are honestly so refreshing, and just, taking care of yourself before you can take care of others is so important. But this seems like a great place to wrap up. I feel so inspired and reinvigorated by this conversation. I know I speak for the Design Justice Actions group at Taubman. We're just so honored to share this space with organizations like DJA Collective and DMU, and excited to continue the conversation. So thank you so much to Jelisa and Lisa for holding this conversation. We're so inspired by the work. Thank you to Tori, Charlene, and Jamie for representing the Design Justice Actions, and to Jonathan and Katie Cole for putting this all together and putting the two organizations in conversation. And we really appreciate everyone who took time out of their day to tune into this event, and all your insightful questions. So with that, I think we'll wrap up. I hope everyone has a great afternoon and enjoy your weekend.
All right. Thank you so much for inviting me. This is part of what feeds my work going forward too. So I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
All right.